Hey there, Nick Hackers here. In this video, we're going to go over what it's like to fail in public when doing open source work, as well as what it's like to join a list of maintainers for an already decently popular open source project. Now, this is all specific to working with Python and PyPi here, but the general takeaways or lessons learned really applies to, becoming a maintainer for any open source project, as well as publishing packages, really in general with any programming language. So this all started about a year ago where I made a pull request on Flask-DebugToolbar to fix a deprecation warning for Jinja 3, which was recently released at that time. And basically it was saying when version 3.1 of Jinja comes out, then Flask-DebugToolbar is not going to be compatible due to, the way it coded certain things. And this pull request addressed those. Now, over the course of the year, this pull request didn't get merged, and there really wasn't any commits happening on this repo for about 2 years. That happens, and it's not necessarily because, the maintainers don't want to work on it anymore. There are cases where, a package actually just works. Like, you don't need to update it every, 3 weeks to add some new stuff because it's a great package and it just works. And that's kind of sort of the case with Flask-DebugToolbar. I mean, there were a couple open PRs and issues to, add and address a couple of interesting things, but generally, if you pulled it into your project, it would do what it needed to do, and it was really good. But this case, this actually broke things to where the latest version of Flask was installing the latest version of Jinja, which is 3.1, as of a couple days ago in whatever, like March 2022. And now it started to get to the point where if you wanted to use the latest version of Flask-DebugToolbar, didn't work. So this PR was sitting here for a while, it didn't get merged, things were breaking. So what I ended up doing was, I just emailed the current maintainer of the project. Their GitHub profile was listed and, they had a website with an email address. So I just shot an email and it didn't take very long for him to go and merge this PR. And then we kind of just had a little bit of back and forth in private over email. Not going to show emails or whatever, but it was basically just saying, hey, do you want to become a maintainer for the project? And we went over some expectations and stuff where, basically I'll be around to commit some PRs like this, where, if something completely breaks, there's one less blocker to be able to merge it, I'll help look at some reviews and, or help look at some PRs to review, or maybe some issues, generally be available for helping and, cutting some new releases as needed. Sure, expectations there are kind of low. This is something where we're talking probably, maybe 5-6 hours a year, something like that. So sure, happy to be on board. I've gotten great use out of this extension. Why not? And okay, this is where things start to get interesting. So the current maintainer merged this PR in, and one of the first things that he asked me to do was hey, do you want to just cut a new release so we can get this going, and then things will be nice and people can install Flask-DebugToolbar with the latest version of Flask, and we're not going to get some errors. Great, sounds good. But before that, there was a new PR that was opened by the current maintainer where, he just wanted to make the package formatting config files a little bit more modern by using setup.config instead of just setup.py alone, basically emulating what Flask does for this file. So if I jump over to the open source repo for Flask here, they have a setup.config file that has all sorts of different attributes of, metadata around the package that you're publishing here. And you can see all sorts of details here, some funky little syntax here, like package directory is the source directory here, and, all sorts of different options. And the maintainer of Flask-DebugToolbar was okay, Flask is a really popular Python language. This extension is made for Flask, and why not just take some inspiration from their setup.py or setup.config file and get that going for this project as well. Because keep in mind, this project is quite old, not in a bad way. It's been around for a long time, many years. So yes, there was this PR here, and I got tagged in to take a look at the PR. And this is the first PR I'm really reviewing on this project here. And this is where I guess some issues start, on my end here. So, right away, pushing packages to PyPi, for my opinion, at least, it hasn't always been super straightforward. There's a million different config files with different options and different ways to publish. So, I just wanted to set the stage here to be I'm not 100% on every single property here because I haven't used them all personally in setup.config. Mostly I use setup.py, not because I think the config version is worse. It's just it's one of those things where you get it to work and then you just do that between all the projects that you have, copy paste and stuff. And with that said, I let him know the way I reviewed this PR was I basically just took a look at his files here in the PR, and then I can't do it due to the font size being so big here in video, but then I just took Flask's setup, that config file here, and I viewed the full file here for this one, and it looks like things got moved. Oh, it did get moved. Yeah, because that's that's going to come in the future in a couple of minutes in this video. But anyways, like long story short, I took all of these properties, put them side by side by Flask's properties, and kind of just looked more at the property name than the value. For example, like, name, version, author, email. Okay, cool. Name, version, author, email. Like they're in here. I kind of just didn't even read the values that much in detail because I kind of figured, and this is probably a bad thing, right? I made an assumption. I made an assumption that the current maintainer would have the correct values here, like no matter what, because maybe they're being ported over from the setup.py file, which already had them. So it was like copy pasting. I probably should have took a little closer look at the values. But yeah, we went over all the properties here, and well, there were a couple issues where like the project URL, like the changelog and the documentation links weren't correct, which he eventually fixed in a later commit there. Those aren't too big of a deal. I mean, it's nice to have these links to be correct, but yeah, there were certain issues with this setup.config file. And I'm not like throwing the current maintainer under a bus. This is more, in my opinion, like an issue for me that went wrong. Like I shouldn't have just looked at this file, right? If someone is asking you to do a review on a PR, even if they say like, look at it, like, that doesn't literally mean just like, look at it, don't run it. So since there was so much changing here around using setup.config, I should have cloned down or pulled down this branch here and just ran it locally, make sure that I can actually install the package and import it, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't do any of that. I just took a look at some things and, made some suggestions around like maybe bumping the latest or bumping the minimum version of Python to be something that's not 2.7, maybe make it a little bit higher. It doesn't necessarily need to be 3.7. This is Flask's one, but yeah. Anyways, that's what happened there. And what ended up happening was, yep, he merged in this PR and pushed it, made a new release. He made the release there. And what ended up happening there was, yeah, so version 12, which was the new release here, 0.12, it had to be yanked because the way things were set up, if you actually just like pip installed this package, like the entire package directory of the package wasn't in there. So let's ignore this source directory because that's a PR that I made to address it. But basically, we previously didn't have the source directory, and the Flask-DebugToolbar directory was inside of, the repo here. And, this is all the files that make the extension work. And you would think like going by this PR that he had open here, if I can bring it back up, what happened to it? Over here? Nope, not that screen. Whatever, it was in this PR here, the closed one. One moment here. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, so you would think like after looking at this, then, oh, maybe I just did have, yeah, I did have it open the whole entire time there. But if you look at this, this is the important part. We can see that we have package dir equals whatever Flask-DebugToolbar. And again, let's pretend that source directory didn't exist before in here. And if you look at the Flask setup, they just have package directory equals source. Now, if you go into Flask's directory structure here in the main repo, they have a source directory there, and then you have the Flask directory. And in our case, we just had the Flask-DebugToolbar with no like inner source directory. So then for our value, it makes logical sense to me, at least in my mind, that why not just put like Flask-DebugToolbar there? So when I was reviewing this PR, like I just assumed like, of course that's going to work. Like why wouldn't it work? And then, you do where Flask-DebugToolbar, whereas with the Flask one, it was like where is that? Somewhere over down here. Yeah, where equals the source, right? So we're just like different directory name, but why wouldn't that work? But apparently it didn't work, and that was like a really big deal because yeah, when these packages got published, they were just missing things, and then issues started rolling in. I was actually surprised at how many folks, not because it's like, oh wow, I didn't think that many people were using Flask-DebugToolbar, but within, I don't know, minutes, maybe like an hour or something of publishing this package, the issues started to roll in where folks were like, by the way, like trying to install the latest version of Flask-DebugToolbar, and like the package files aren't in there. And yeah, kind of an issue. So on PyPi, and this is usually sort of common for a lot of other programming languages, package repos, there's this idea of you can yank a package or basically remove it, but not so much remove it. And I don't even know the details, honestly, with yanked, and this became like why this version was also yanked and broken, but we'll get to there in due time. But long story short, yeah, he wanted to yank these, both of these versions here, 0.12 and 0.12.1, because yeah, they both just didn't have the necessary files in there to be able to use the library. And 0.12.1 was just basically a small release to fix the changelog and documentation lines here. Like it wasn't even, and I think he pretty much did that probably like, 10 minutes or something after publishing this package here. So it wasn't even like seeing the issues and then like republishing it, knowing it's broken. It was more just like, oh yeah, duh, I re-reviewed things after I pushed, and it's like those, URLs should be working. And yeah, so what I ended up doing there was, well, I was tasked to kind of fix this. Like, let's make the setup config file work. Now, we did talk a little bit in private, and like the options were basically, well, do we roll things all the way back to where, the setup.config file didn't exist, and we just used the old setup.py file, and then like technically that probably would have worked. But if we want to move to this new format, I'm always a fan of kind of just moving forward. Like, I'd rather spend a little bit more time and fix the thing that's broken than like immediately roll back to like the old version. Yeah, that also goes for like deploying applications as well, like actual like web apps that you might be building, not necessarily just packages that you might be publishing. So I took a look into it, got totally set up in my local dev environment on my dev box. I was able to, just replicate the issue of if I were to install things using this current configuration and I try to, just import the package, it doesn't work, and then if I actually build the package locally with, using whatever, like the Python build module, then I noticed too, like there were just a whole bunch of files missing there. So that's good. At least, I was able to replicate the issue in development to now it's like, we don't need to like publish stuff to PyPi just to like test to make sure things are working or not. And debugging process, like, what went through my mind, like what could I do to potentially fix this? I started looking for differences between the Flask setup as well as our setup here. And yeah, the only real big difference that I found was, well, the Flask directory structure just had that extra source directory, and that was being pointed to here instead of the actual module itself, or, in this case, the subfolder Flask. And, maybe that one extra directory being pointed to makes a big difference because in this case here, if this package directory is Flask-DebugToolbar, like, I don't know, maybe, yeah, I can't explain it well enough and why it didn't work, but I guess that external or, extra directory path is important, like for the way that includes like directories, whatever, right? I'm not going to mumble through that. But what I ended up doing, after, a little bit of fooling around and trying to figure out like, what the heck is up with this double equals? Like if I put that on two different lines, like indentation, does that make a difference? So I started looking at the documentation, but long story short, what I ended up doing was just moved everything into the source directory to be more similar to Flask. And things immediately started to work. And that is a PR that I made here, like move the library into the source directory. And yes, then all the files were included. I was able to locally build the package and make sure all the files were in there. I was able to locally install it and actually import Flask-DebugToolbar, and basically it completely worked. And this idea of using the source directory, it is mentioned in the official Python documentation for packaging files. It's in the example there. It's also used by a whole bunch of different large Python projects like Flask. So yeah, at the time I also didn't have access to publish this thing, the change here. So, I gave him a workflow of things to potentially do. And I think that's good. If you don't have permission to do something, at least write out the steps so someone can just quickly go through them here. So I was like, okay, let's push it up to the test PyPi repo. So this is the official PyPi repo, but there is a test version of this as well. I think it's just like the test subdomain, but it's a way for you as a package developer to push things to the test repo to make sure that they work. And then you can install them locally from the test version. And then if it does work, then, you could be fairly confident that you can push it to the real one. And going back to here, yes, so I was like, let's push it to there and then install the package, confirm it works, modify the version to be the real version that we want, build it again, push it to the real one, then install it from the real one. And if it actually works, then go ahead and update the changelog and like get tagged the release. And what ended up happening there was, he just gave me access to do all of the stuff. So then I just started doing it on my own. I started executing all of these steps here in succession in order, and they all worked perfectly fine. Except like this step here, and this was an oversight. So going like another failure, small failure, but like ended up being an issue, sort of. If we go to here, when the project was moved over to set up that config, he dropped in this like dev 0 patch version here. And I sort of just, when I was working on this PR here and I was ready to push the new release, I kind of figured, okay, well, let's just remove the dev 0. And then what we ended up with was 0.13. So we can see here 0.13. However, if you look at all the other versions that were pushed to this PyPi here, more recently at least, it should have been 0.12, .0, right? Like it's weird that like why wouldn't we put the .0 for 13 even though we have it for 12? Because if you were to push a patch to 13, you would expect to have 0.13.1, so why not have the last 0 there? And you can see other versions in the past, .11.0, .10.0, over here, .9.0, and then eventually I think that like 0.7 from like literally 10 years ago didn't have the 0, and but we can see we want the 0. So then I'm thinking, okay, cool. And this is comes down to me here, not having a ton of experience yanking packages from PyPi. It's super easy. Like if I log in, you can go to the admin for the package here, and there's like a little drop-down box to yank it. And so I thought, okay, so why don't I yank 0.13? Then I'll just push up 0.13.0, which is a completely new version. Shouldn't conflict with the yanked one because apparently you can't push a new version that's been yanked with the same version name. So I'm like, okay, cool, this is great. Let me yank this, done. And then push the new version, 0.13.0. No. For whatever reason, PyPi denied me the ability to push 0.13.0, even though 0.13.0 is different than 0.13. For whatever reason, on PyPi, when it was, came time for me to upload the actual package, it said that the version already existed, even though it didn't. Like this one existed and it was yanked. So I couldn't push 0.13.0. I had to go and then cut another release for 0.13.1, which really was nothing at all. Like there was no difference between 0.13 and 0.13.1 other than, I just wanted to actually set that as the version. So like long story short, this is how you end up in a situation where like in a 24-hour period of time, it's like, this version technically worked with older versions of Flask, but then it was like, nope, yanked, nope, yanked, nope, yanked, and then finally it works. And once I went through all the steps here and here, then finally, I just pushed up the tag here, made some adjustments to the changelog here to, just basically go over what went wrong, and not so much what went wrong, but like, changelog of things that were fixed. So that's how you end up failing a little bit in public. Was it the end of the world? No. A couple issues were opened by folks, and even a PR was made to address the setup config file. Ultimately didn't get merged in because, it just ended up not working in the end. Even the author was like, nah, never mind, like this thing, actually didn't work. But it was cool. It's kind of nice to have a fire under you to fix things. But at the same time, like another takeaway is, and this happens, if you are working anywhere, like, you just got to go in with this stuff with a level head and like not rush stuff. So there was no like panic mode, like, oh my God, the package is broken. Like, what do we do? And then it's like super stressful. No, it was just more like, look, the thing isn't working. People can install a lesser version if they want to like version lock Jinja to an older version. It's totally fine. And, within maybe a half an hour or something like that, like all of this ended up working in the end. So that is a long version of what happened. And if you ever become a maintainer for someone else's project and they task you to release a new package or something like that, especially with like a new system that you're not super familiar with, even, if both people aren't familiar with it, like the person making the PR and you reviewing it, etc., definitely use the test version of your package repo if you happen to have one, or at least test things locally, right? Before, just saying like, oh yeah, it totally works. I promise, I think. But that's basically it for this one. Let me know some stories below in the comments if you've ever had a situation where, you broke something out in the open, specifically around open source. Maybe we can do future videos around, breaking things in production on a real application or something like that. But on that note, thanks a lot for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it does help a lot, and I will see you in the next video.